The idea of human rights is that each one of us, no matter who we are or where we are born, is entitled to the same basic rights and freedoms. Human rights are not privileges, and they cannot be granted or revoked. They are inalienable and universal. That may sound straightforward enough, but it gets incredibly complicated as soon as anyone tries to put the idea into practice. What exactly are the basic human rights? Who gets to pick them? Who enforces them, and how? The history behind the concept of human rights is a long one. Throughout the centuries and across societies, religions, and cultures, we have struggled with defining notions of rightfulness, justice, and rights. But one of the most modern affirmations of universal human rights emerged from the ruins of World War II with the creation of the United Nations. The treaty that established the UN gives as one of its purposes to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. And with the same spirit, in 1948, the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document, written by an international committee chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, lays the basis for modern international human rights law. The Declaration is based on the principle that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. It lists 30 articles recognizing, among other things, the principle of non-discrimination and the right to life and liberty. It refers to negative freedoms, like the freedom from torture or slavery, as well as positive freedoms, such as the freedom of movement and residence. It encompasses basic civil and political rights, such as freedom of expression, religion, or peaceful assembly, as well as social, economic, and cultural rights, such as the right to education and the right to freely choose one's occupation and be paid and treated fairly. The Declaration takes no sides as to which rights are more important, insisting on their universality, indivisibility, and interdependence. And in the past decades, international human rights law has grown, deepening and expanding our understanding of what human rights are and how to better protect them. So if these principles are so well developed, then why are human rights abused and ignored time and time again all over the world? The problem, in general, is that it is not at all easy to universally enforce these rights or to punish transgressors. The UDHR itself, despite being highly authoritative and respected, is a declaration, not a hard law. So when individual countries violate it, the mechanisms to address those violations are weak. For example, the main bodies within the UN in charge of protecting human rights mostly monitor and investigate violations, but they cannot force states to, say, change a policy or compensate a victim. That's why some critics say it's naive to consider human rights a given in a world where state interests wield so much power. Critics also question the universality of human rights and emphasize that their development has been heavily guided by a small number of mostly Western nations, to the detriment of inclusiveness. The result? A general bias in favor of civil political liberties over socio-political rights, and of individual over collective or groups' rights. Others defend universal human rights laws and point at the positive role they have on setting international standards and helping activists in their campaigns. They also point out that not all international human rights instruments are powerless. For example, the European Convention on Human Rights establishes a court where the 47 member countries and their citizens can bring cases. The court issues binding decisions that each member state must comply with. Human rights law is constantly evolving, as are our views and definitions of what the basic human rights should be. For example, how basic or important is the right to democracy or to development? And as our lives are increasingly digital, should there be a right to access the internet? A right to digital privacy? What do you think?
What are human rights really? If this is a question you have been pondering upon for a long time, or perhaps now for the first time, this is the video for you. Using only a few minutes, we will teach you the basics of human rights law, so hang along. Before looking into what human rights are, let us jump back in time to get some context. Although the history of human rights can be traced even further back in time, let us start in 1948. After the end of World War II, which had been brutal and caused a lot of suffering, the international community was determined to prevent future wars and to stop states from committing further violations against their populations. With the horrors of the war fresh in memory, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document consisting of 30 articles setting out rights that every human is entitled to purely by the virtue of being human. The Declaration was groundbreaking and is often considered to be the founding document of human rights law. For the first time, it was acknowledged that states not only have duties towards each other, but also towards individuals. The Declaration sets out that every human, everywhere, has the same inherent rights, and it laid the groundwork for the creation of various other human rights documents. So, what are human rights actually? Human rights are rights and freedoms that, as we learned, belong to every individual. They protect us, like this shield here, from power abuses by states. This means that human rights are entitlements of individuals, but also obligations of states. On a general level, human rights can be divided into two categories: civil and political rights, and economic, social, and cultural rights. The rights that belong to the first group, civil and political rights, are connected to the possibility of everyone to participate in public life and be free from state abuse and repression. Those rights include, for instance, the prohibition of torture and freedom of speech. Social, economic, and cultural rights, on the other hand, are more concerned with fulfilling people's basic needs and ensuring a minimum quality of life. There is, for instance, the right to work and the right to food. However, in reality, all human rights are closely connected and rely on each other, since the fulfillment of any one right depends on the fulfillment of the others. A principle which is very fundamental to human rights is also the principle of equality and non-discrimination. Since human rights belong to everyone universally, discrimination in the fulfillment of such rights is a violation of the rights in question. There are three levels of human rights obligations: international, regional, and national. Human rights are set out in international documents, such as the UN Core Human Rights Treaties, and in regional documents, such as the African, American, or the European Regional Human Rights Treaties. Human rights are also enshrined in national laws, such as constitutions and other laws. Which human rights obligations a state has, therefore, depends on a variety of factors, including which binding documents it has adopted and what its national laws provide. However, all states in the world are also bound by international customary law. That is, very simply put, states' previous behavior. They are also bound by general principles of law, which include certain human rights standards that bind all states. For every human right that an individual has, a state has the corresponding obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill the right. This means that the state cannot violate your rights. The state must also protect your rights from harm caused by others, as well as take active measures to make sure that you can enjoy your rights in practice. Thank you for watching this video. To learn more about human rights, make sure to check our website, listen to our podcast on human rights, and stay tuned for more content.